"Mind your business," the teacher screamed at the single mom defending her son. Then she slammed down her badge, and the whole school realized they just yelled at the FBI. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Angela Ramirez's heels clicked against the polished hallway floor as she strode through the empty corridors of Jefferson Middle School. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, and the usual chaos of the school day had given way to an eerie quiet. Her navy blazer was wrinkled from a long day at the field office, and dark circles shadowed her eyes, but determination fueled every step. The image of Mateo's tear-stained face when she'd picked him up from the bus stop haunted her. Her gentle, artistic 13-year-old boy had tried to hide his pain, but she knew, she always knew. This time was different. Worse than before. "They said I don't belong here, Mom," he had whispered, his shoulders shaking. "They said people like us should go back where we came from." The words had cut through her heart like a knife. Angela's hands clenched into fists as she rounded the corner toward the administrative offices. She'd spent the past 3 months trying to handle this the right way. Emails, phone calls, scheduled meetings. Nothing had changed. If anything, the bullying had gotten worse. The secretary's desk was empty. Most staff had already left for the day. But light spilled from beneath Principal Harris's door, along with the murmur of voices. Angela recognized one as belonging to Mrs. Peterson, Mateo's homeroom teacher. Perfect. The two people she needed to speak with were already together. She paused outside the door, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The weight of her FBI badge felt heavy in her bag, but she'd promised herself she wouldn't use it. This was about being a mother, not a federal agent. Still, knowing it was there gave her strength. Angela knocked firmly on the door. Without waiting for a response, she pushed it open. Principal Harris sat behind his massive oak desk, his round face already settling into the practiced, placating expression she'd grown to hate. Mrs. Peterson stood near the window, arms crossed, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "Miss Ramirez," Principal Harris said, adjusting his tie. "We weren't expecting you. I'm afraid if you want to schedule a meeting—" "No more scheduled meetings," Angela cut in, her voice steady, despite the anger coursing through her. "My son came home crying again today. This is the 3rd time this month." Mrs. Peterson sighed dramatically. "Children get upset, Miss Ramirez. It's part of growing up." "Being called racial slurs is not part of growing up," Angela replied, her dark eyes fixed on the teacher. "Neither is having his artwork destroyed or being tripped in the hallway. You've seen it happen. You've done nothing." The principal cleared his throat. "Now, Miss Ramirez, I understand you're upset, but we have procedures. Your procedures aren't working." Angela moved closer to the desk. "Today, 3 boys cornered my son in the bathroom. They told him to go back to where he came from. They threw his journal in the toilet, the journal his father gave him before he died." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "And you know what Mateo said? He said Mrs. Peterson walked by when he was trying to get his journal out of the toilet. She looked right at him and kept walking." Mrs. Peterson's face flushed red. "That is not what happened. I never saw—" "Are you calling my son a liar?" Angela's voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm saying that some students have a tendency to exaggerate situations for attention." "Mrs.?" Peterson snapped. "Frankly, if Mateo spent less time drawing in that journal and more time trying to fit in—" "Fit in?" Angela's eyebrows shot up. "My son shouldn't have to fit in. He should be safe at school, free to be himself without fear of harassment or discrimination." Principal Harris raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Perhaps we could schedule a meeting with the other parents involved." "I've tried that," Angela interrupted. 3 times. They didn't show up, and you did nothing about it. Meanwhile, my son dreads coming to school every day. He's losing weight, he's having nightmares, and you two sit here making excuses." Mrs. Peterson's face hardened. "Listen here." "No, you listen." Angela stepped forward, her voice rising. "I've been patient. I've followed your procedures. I've attended your meetings. But this ends now. Either you take actual steps to protect my son and the other kids being bullied, or what?" Mrs. Peterson's voice turned sharp and dismissive. "Mind your business, lady." The room fell silent. Angela stared at the teacher for a long moment, her breath coming in controlled, measured beats. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached into her bag. Her fingers closed around the familiar leather case. She pulled out her FBI badge and set it firmly on Principal Harris's desk with a soft but definitive thud. The metallic shield caught the late afternoon light, gleaming with authority. Both the principal and Mrs. Peterson stared at it, their faces draining of color. The silence in Principal Harris's office was deafening as Angela's FBI badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The gold shield and credentials lay between them on the desk, like an unexpected bomb, its presence changing everything in an instant. Mrs. Peterson, Mateo's teacher, sank back into her chair. The color drained from her face, turning it almost ghostly white. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Gone was the dismissive attitude from moments before, replaced by visible shock and growing alarm. Principal Harris tugged at his collar, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "Agent Ramirez. 1. We had no idea. Please understand, if you'd known I was FBI, you'd have taken the bullying seriously?" Angela's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath her words. "That's exactly the problem. Every child deserves to be protected, badge or no badge." Mateo sat straighter in his chair beside her. His eyes were wide as they darted between his mother and his teacher, a mix of surprise and admiration on his young face. For weeks, he'd suffered in silence as classmates mocked his heritage and shoved him in the hallways. Now, watching his mother stand up to the very people who'd ignored his pain, something shifted in his expression. Mrs. Peterson found her voice, though it quivered. "Agent Ramirez, I assure you, we take all allegations of bullying very..." "Allegations?" Angela leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "My son came home with bruises last week. Yesterday, 3 boys cornered him in the bathroom and told him to go back where he came from. He's been here his whole life, Mrs. Peterson. This is his home." Principal Harris mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "We'll launch a full investigation immediately. The students responsible will face appropriate consequences." "And what about the adults responsible?" Angela's gaze swept between them. "The ones who saw it happening and looked the other way? Who dismissed his complaints because it was easier than confronting the truth?" The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Mrs. Peterson's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, genuine remorse crossed her features. "You're right," she whispered. I should have done more." Angela took a deep breath, centering herself. This wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about making things right. "I don't want apologies. I want action. Real changes to protect all our kids." Principal Harris nodded vigorously, eager to make amends. Of course. We can schedule a meeting first thing tomorrow to discuss new anti-bullying protocols. Perhaps you'd be willing to share your expertise." "I would." Angela gathered her badge, tucking it away. "And I'll be watching to make sure these changes stick." She stood, straightening her blazer. "Come on, Mijo, let's go home." Mateo rose, holding his head higher than he had in weeks. As they walked to the door, Angela paused and turned back. "One more thing. This badge, it's not what makes my concerns valid. I'm a mother first, and that should have been enough." The drive home was quiet at first, streetlights flickering past as dusk settled over their small town. Mateo kept sneaking glances at his mother, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Mom?" he finally said, his voice soft but stronger than it had been in days. That was pretty amazing." Angela reached over and squeezed his hand. "Things are going to be different now, mi amor. No more hiding, no more letting them pretend they don't see what's happening. You really think they'll change things?" "They will." Angela's tone was firm, certain. "Because we're not going to stop until they do. Together, okay?" Mateo's grip tightened on her hand. "Together?" he agreed, hope blooming in his voice. They drove through familiar neighborhoods, past houses where families were settling in for dinner, windows glowing warm and inviting. Angela's mind raced with plans and possibilities, while her heart ached with fierce love for her son. She'd protected others her whole career, witnesses, victims, communities in need. Now her most important case was right here, sitting beside her, holding her hand like she was his hero. "Mom?" Mateo's voice broke into her thoughts. "I'm glad you showed them who you really are." Angela smiled, though uncertainty flickered at the edges of her mind. She'd crossed a line today, using her badge in a personal matter. The revelation would spread through their small town like wildfire, and she couldn't predict all the consequences. But looking at her son's renewed confidence, his shoulders no longer hunched with the weight of constant fear, she knew she'd do it again in a heartbeat. They pulled into their driveway, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in soft purples and blues. Mateo's hand was warm in hers, full of trust and restored faith. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, this moment was enough. Mother and son, united and unafraid, ready to face whatever came next. The morning sun painted long shadows across Riverside Middle School's brick walls as Angela pulled up to the drop-off lane. She noticed the usual crowd of parents had formed unusual clusters, their heads bent together in whispered conversation. As soon as they spotted her silver sedan, the murmuring intensified. Mateo shifted in the passenger seat, his dark eyes fixed on his lap. "Maybe I should just go home today, Mom." Angela's heart ached at the uncertainty in his voice. Just yesterday, he'd looked at her with such pride when she'd shown her badge. Now that pride had withered into something more fragile. "Hey," she said softly, reaching over to straighten his collar. "Remember what we talked about? You have every right to be here. We don't hide." He nodded, but his shoulders remained tense. Angela watched as he grabbed his backpack, the weight of it making him lean slightly to one side. The Superman logo she'd helped him iron on last summer was starting to peel at the corners. As they walked toward the entrance, the whispers grew more distinct. "Thinks she can just throw her weight around. Intimidating school staff. Abuse of power." Angela kept her chin up, her FBI training kicking in automatically. She'd faced down hardened criminals, she could handle playground politics. But these weren't suspects in an investigation. These were her neighbors, parents she'd exchanged pleasantries with at PTA meetings and soccer games. Mrs. Peterson, whose daughters shared art class with Mateo, deliberately turned her back as they passed. Mr. Jenkins, the basketball coach, crossed his arms and stared with open hostility. Angela felt Mateo press closer to her side. Near the school doors, she spotted Lisa Chen, one of the few parents who'd always been friendly. Their eyes met briefly, before Lisa looked away, hurriedly ushering her son inside. The rejection stung more than Angela wanted to admit. "Agent Ramirez!" The sharp voice cut through the morning chatter. Angela turned to see Karen Mitchell striding toward them, her designer handbag swinging like a weapon. She was head of the PTA and mother to one of the boys who'd been bullying Mateo. "Mrs. Mitchell," Angela acknowledged calmly, positioning herself slightly in front of her son. "The board will be hearing about your little performance yesterday," Karen announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We don't appreciate federal agents terrorizing our teachers." Angela felt Mateo flinch behind her. She kept her voice steady, professional. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Mitchell, but I was here as a parent, addressing a serious issue affecting my child's safety." "Oh, please," Karen scoffed. "You flashed your badge to intimidate them. That's a gross misuse of authority, and you know it." Other parents were gathering now, forming a loose circle around them. Angela noticed phones being pulled out, no doubt recording the confrontation. She'd seen enough social media witch hunts to know how this could spiral. "Mom," Mateo whispered urgently, tugging at her sleeve. "The bell's going to ring." Angela placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Go on inside, mijo. I'll see you after school." He hesitated, his dark eyes worried. "But it's okay," she assured him, with a smile she didn't quite feel. "I've got this." Mateo slipped through the crowd, his head down. Angela watched until he disappeared inside, before turning back to Karen Mitchell's smugly expectant face. "I understand you're upset," Angela said, keeping her tone professional, despite the anger burning in her chest. But my priority is ensuring every child in this school feels safe, including yours, Mrs. Mitchell. Don't you dare bring my Tommy into this, Karen snapped. He's a good boy. Maybe if your son wasn't so. She trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Angela's fingers itched to reach for her badge again, to remind them all that she wasn't someone to be dismissed or intimidated. But that would only prove their accusations right. Instead, she straightened her spine and looked Karen directly in the eye. I'd be happy to discuss this further at the next PTA meeting. For now, I believe we're all setting a poor example for our children. She turned and walked away, feeling dozens of eyes boring into her back. The whispers followed her to her car. Who does she think she is? Throwing her weight around. These people always make everything about race. Angela kept her composure until she was safely inside her vehicle. Only then did she allow her hands to shake slightly on the steering wheel. She'd faced down drug cartels and human trafficking rings, but somehow this felt more personal, more devastating. The drive home was a blur of worried thoughts about Mateo. Would the other kids leave him alone today? Would the teachers treat him fairly? She should have requested a meeting with the superintendent instead of confronting the principal directly. Should have found a different way to handle it. She pulled into her driveway, noticing Mrs. Garcia from next door, quickly closing her curtains. Even here, in the neighborhood where she'd lived for 5 years, the ripples of yesterday's confrontation had spread. Angela walked up to her front door, already mentally composing an email to her FBI supervisor. She needed to document everything before rumors started reaching the office. Her hand froze on the doorknob as she spotted something white beneath her feet. A piece of paper had been shoved under her door. She picked it up with practiced care, handling it by the corners as years of evidence collection training kicked in. The message was typed in bold letters. "Go back where you came from." Angela's chest tightened as she stared at those 6 words. This wasn't just about her badge anymore. This wasn't just about Mateo's bullying or an angry PTA mom. This was something darker, something that had been lurking beneath the surface of their nice community all along. She looked up and down her quiet suburban street, wondering which of her neighbors had written it. Was it the same people who'd smiled and waved at her yesterday morning? The same ones who'd praised Mateo's science fair project last spring? The paper trembled slightly in her hands as the weight of reality settled over her. This wasn't just a school problem anymore. Angela's heels clicked against the polished floor of the FBI field office as she made her way to her desk. The familiar smell of coffee and printer paper usually brought comfort, but today her stomach churned with anxiety. Several colleagues glanced her way, quickly averting their eyes when she looked back. The morning's whispers at Mateo's school still echoed in her mind. Agent Ramirez. The stern voice of Special Agent Reed, her supervisor, cut through her thoughts. My office. Now. Angela's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral as she followed him. The glass-walled office felt smaller than usual, and Reed's typically neat desk was covered with papers, complaint forms, she realized with a sinking feeling. Close the door, Reed instructed, settling into his chair. He picked up one of the forms, adjusting his reading glasses. Care to explain why I have a stack of formal complaints from parents at Riverside Middle School? Something about an FBI agent using her badge to intimidate school staff? Angela straightened in her chair. Sir, I was addressing a serious bullying situation involving my son. The school has repeatedly ignored. Stop. Reed held up his hand. I understand you're a mother protecting her child, but you're also a federal agent working on a sensitive civil rights investigation in this community. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Do you have any idea how this looks? With all due respect, sir, how it looks is that an FBI agent witnessed discrimination and took action. Isn't that exactly what we're supposed to do? Not by compromising an ongoing investigation. Reed's voice rose slightly. He took a breath, visibly calming himself. These parents are claiming you abused your authority. They're threatening to go to the media. Angela felt her chest tighten. The media? Over standing up to bullies? Over an FBI agent, allegedly using her position to settle personal matters. Reed shuffled through more papers. And there's more. Some of these complaints include concerning language about your heritage. The familiar sting of prejudice made Angela's jaw clench. So they're not just attacking my actions, they're attacking who I am, which is exactly why this is so delicate. Reed leaned forward. You're investigating civil rights violations in this same community. How can we maintain objectivity when you're personally involved in a conflict with these people? I can separate my personal life from my work, Angela insisted, though doubt crept into her voice. Can you? Reed's expression softened slightly. Angela, you're one of our best agents. Your work on this case has been exemplary. But this situation, he gestured at the complaints, this could derail everything we've built. Angela felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. What are you saying, sir? I'm saying you have 2 weeks to show me this won't affect your investigation. 2 weeks to smooth things over with the school community. Reed's tone was final. Otherwise, I'll have to reassign the case. Sir, please. Angela leaned forward. This investigation is crucial. These people need to know they can't just... 2 weeks, Agent Ramirez. Reed put his glasses back on, returning to his paperwork. And Angela? No more badge incidents? Angela stood on shaky legs, her professional mask barely holding. As she walked back to her desk, the office felt different, colder, more hostile. She gathered her things, ignoring the curious glances from colleagues who had undoubtedly heard about the situation. The drive home was a blur. Angela's mind raced with the implications of Reed's ultimatum. 2 weeks to save her investigation. 2 weeks to prove she could remain professional while watching her son suffer. 2 weeks to somehow change the hearts of people who seemed determined to hate her. As she pulled into her driveway, she spotted Mateo's face in the living room window. He pressed his hand against the glass, worry evident, even from a distance. The sight of him so young, so vulnerable, made her heart ache. Angela took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders before getting out of the car. She wouldn't let him see her fear. As she walked to the front door, Mateo yanked it open, rushing to meet her. Mom, are you okay? His dark eyes searched her face. I heard some kids at school saying their parents were going to get you in trouble. Angela pulled him into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. We'll get through this, she whispered, as much for herself as for him. Together. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Riverside Middle School's library, casting long shadows across rows of well-worn books. Angela Ramirez smoothed her casual sweater, deliberately chosen instead of her usual work attire, and arranged a cart of returned books. The quiet space smelled of paper and wood polish, a welcome change from the tension-filled halls outside. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, had welcomed Angela's offer to help with genuine warmth. Those science fiction books need sorting, she said, pointing to a shelf near the back. The kids always mix them up with the fantasy section. As Angela wheeled the cart toward the science fiction shelves, she noticed a familiar figure hunched in the corner. Jason Miller sat alone at a study table, holding a book upside down and stealing glances at his phone beneath it. His shoulders were tense, his jaw set in that same defensive position she'd seen when he'd taunted Mateo. Angela paused, studying him. Without his usual group of friends, Jason looked smaller somehow, younger. His sneakers were scuffed, his jacket frayed at the edges. She thought of her case files at work, how often bullies came from troubled homes themselves. That's an interesting way to read, Angela said softly, approaching his table. Jason jumped, nearly dropping his phone. His face flushed red as he scrambled to hide it. I'm just... He glanced at the book's cover, clearly seeing it was upside down for the first time. Whatever. Instead of scolding him, Angela pulled out a chair. You know, when Mateo was struggling with reading, we found these great graphic novels that made it more fun. She kept her voice casual, as if they were just two people talking about books. I'm not struggling, Jason snapped, but his eyes darted away. And I don't need help from Mateo's mom. Fair enough, Angela said, sliding a colorful book from her cart. But this one's about a kid who becomes a secret agent. Pretty cool stuff. She placed it on the table, not pushing it directly at him. The pictures helped tell the story. Jason's fingers twitched toward the book, but he pulled them back. Why are you even being nice to me? You know what I did. Angela took a deep breath. Because everyone deserves a second chance, and sometimes people act tough because they're dealing with hard stuff themselves. For a moment, Jason's carefully maintained mask slipped. She caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in his eyes before he looked away. "My dad says I shouldn't talk to you." "Your dad doesn't have to know we had a conversation about books," Angela said gently. She stood up, straightening her sweater. "I'll be here every Tuesday morning if you want to try that graphic novel. No pressure." She walked back to her cart, but kept Jason in her peripheral vision. After a few minutes, he slowly reached for the book she'd left, opening it with careful fingers. The morning passed quietly. Angela shelved books, helped a few students find research materials, and noticed Jason actually reading, his phone forgotten beside him. When the lunch bell rang, he hurriedly put the book back on the table and rushed out, but Angela saw him glance back once. After school, Angela made her way to the cafeteria where the aftercare program was setting up. Children's backpacks lined the walls, and a few teachers arranged snacks and activity materials. Miss Rodriguez, the program coordinator, brightened when she saw Angela. "Mrs. Ramirez, are you really going to help with aftercare?" The young teacher's enthusiasm was contagious. "I'd like to, if you'll have me," Angela replied. "Maybe twice a week? I think it's important for the kids to see me as more than just." She trailed off, not wanting to mention her badge. "More than just Mateo's mom?" Miss Rodriguez supplied kindly. "We'd love the help. Some of these kids could really use a mentor." As they discussed the schedule, Mateo appeared in the doorway. He hung back, watching his mother chat with his teachers and help arrange board games on the tables. When Angela looked up and waved him over, she saw an unfamiliar expression cross his face, pride mixed with uncertainty. "Mom?" he said quietly when he reached her. "You're really going to help out here?" Angela touched his shoulder gently. "Twice a week. Is that okay?" Mateo nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's good." He glanced around the room, then back at her. "But what if some of the kids still don't like us?" Angela saw the doubt in his eyes, the lingering fear that her presence might make things worse instead of better. But she also saw hope there, small but growing, like a seedling pushing through concrete. "Then, we'll give them time," she said, squeezing his shoulder. "Sometimes people just need to see who you really are." Miss Rodriguez called out that aftercare was starting, and students began filtering in. Angela watched as Mateo found a seat at one of the tables, pulling out his homework. Some students still gave them wary looks, but others smiled and waved. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. She thought of Jason in the library, of the moment his defenses had cracked just slightly. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but maybe, one small interaction at a time, they could build something better. Angela took her place at the homework help table, ready to begin. The school cafeteria had been transformed for the monthly PTA meeting, its long tables pushed against the walls to make room for rows of metal folding chairs. Angela sat near the back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as parents filed in. The familiar scent of cleaning supplies and yesterday's lunch couldn't mask the tension hanging heavy in the air. Mrs. Peterson, the PTA president, stood at the podium, her silver-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light. "Before we begin our regular agenda, several parents have requested to discuss recent events involving school safety and disciplinary measures." Angela's stomach tightened. She noticed the way some parents turned to stare at her, their whispers barely concealed behind raised hands. "I'd like to speak," called out Mr. Richardson, father of one of the boys who had been bullying Mateo. He stood, his face flushed with anger. "What happened last week was a clear abuse of power. We can't have federal agents intimidating our teachers and administrators." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Angela remained still, her FBI training helping her maintain a neutral expression. "My son came home crying," Mr. Richardson continued, his voice rising. "He said he's afraid to even look at Mateo now, worried the FBI will show up at our door." "That's not what happened," Angela finally spoke up, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I came to the school as a mother, concerned about my son being repeatedly bullied. The teacher dismissed me." "You flashed your badge, Mrs." Collins interrupted from 3 rows ahead. "That's intimidation, plain and simple. Your badge has no place here. This is a school, Not a crime scene. More parents joined in, their voices overlapping. She's trying to control the school. What about our children's rights? She should be investigated. Principal Martinez raised his hands for quiet. Please, let's maintain order. Mrs. Ramirez has every right to advocate for her son's safety, just like any other parent. But she's not like any other parent, is she? Sneered Mrs. Turner, standing up with her designer purse clutched to her chest. She's using her position to get special treatment. My daughter says Mateo is always causing trouble, always playing the victim. My son has been pushed downstairs, Angela cut in, her voice trembling with controlled emotion. He's had his lunch thrown away, been called names I won't repeat in this room. I reported it through proper channels for weeks. Nothing was done. Maybe he needs to toughen up a little, someone called from the back. Angela rose slowly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. The room fell silent. I want to be clear about something. I love this community. I chose to raise my son here. But when I see injustice, whether as an FBI agent or as a mother, I cannot and will not stay silent. There it is, Mr. Richardson pointed accusingly. Threats about injustice from the FBI. This is exactly what we're talking about. Mrs. Peterson tried to restore order, but the room had devolved into chaos. Parents were standing, pointing fingers, taking sides. Angela noticed a few sympathetic faces, but they remained quiet, unwilling to speak up. I move that we formally request the school board to investigate Mrs. Ramirez's conduct, Mrs. Collins announced loudly. All in favor? Hands shot up around the room. Angela felt her chest constrict as she counted them, at least 2/3 of the parents present. Principal Martinez stepped forward. That's not within the PTA's authority. This meeting is supposed to be about supporting our school and our students. That's exactly what we're trying to do, Mr. Richardson retorted. Protect our kids from overreach and intimidation. Angela gathered her purse and jacket. The weight of dozens of hostile stares pressed down on her shoulders as she walked toward the exit. She paused at the door, turning to face the room one last time. Every child in this school deserves to feel safe, she said quietly, but her voice carried in the sudden hush. Every single one. Not just yours, not just mine, all of them. That's not a threat, it's a promise I made when I took my oath to serve and protect, and it's a promise I make as a mother who wants better for all our children. She stepped into the empty hallway, her footsteps echoing against the rows of lockers. Through the walls, she could hear the meeting erupting into fresh arguments. The school's mission statement was painted above the entrance, building tomorrow's leaders today. Angela stopped beneath it, closing her eyes. This wasn't just about Mateo anymore. It wasn't even about her badge or her job. This was about something bigger, the soul of a community that needed to decide what it truly stood for. The hallway was silent as she offered up a simple prayer, asking for the strength to face whatever came next. Standing there in the dimly lit corridor, Angela felt the full weight of the battle ahead. It would take more than her badge or her authority to heal these divisions. It would take something deeper, something that spoke to the heart of who they all were, as neighbors, as parents, as human beings. She pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped into the cool evening air. Behind her, the PTA meeting continued, voices rising and falling like waves against the shore. But Angela knew now what she was fighting for. Not just her son's safety, but the very heart of the community itself. The afternoon sun streamed through the library windows, casting long shadows across the wooden tables where a handful of students hunched over their homework. Angela moved between them, her FBI badge and worries temporarily forgotten as she focused on helping kids with math problems and reading assignments. That's it, Sarah, she encouraged a girl with thick glasses who had just solved a tricky multiplication problem. See? Breaking it down into smaller steps makes it easier. The girl beamed, her confidence visibly growing. Angela smiled back, remembering how Mateo had struggled with similar problems last year. Her son was at soccer practice now, a small victory, since he'd almost quit the team after the bullying started. Movement near the library entrance caught her attention. Jason Miller stood in the doorway, his usual swagger replaced by uncertainty. His backpack hung from one shoulder, and he shifted his weight from foot to foot, looking ready to bolt at any second. Angela pretended not to notice him, giving him space to decide. She moved to help Tommy with his spelling worksheet, but kept Jason in her peripheral vision. After what felt like minutes, he finally slipped into the room and took a seat at the farthest table. The other kids tensed. Angela saw Sarah scrunch lower in her chair, and Tommy's grip tightened on his pencil. Jason was known for his sharp words and occasional shoving in the hallways. His presence here was unexpected. Angela continued helping the other students, but deliberately kept her voice warm and gentle. "That's good thinking, Tommy. Sometimes he comes before he, but not always. Let's look at the rule together." From his corner, Jason pulled out a crumpled paper and started working, or at least pretending to. His shoulders were tight, his head down, but Angela caught him glancing their way several times. After helping Tommy, she casually made her way toward Jason's table. "Would you like some help?" she asked softly, keeping a respectful distance. He jumped slightly, as if surprised anyone would approach him. "No," he muttered, then paused. "Maybe. It's stupid anyway." Angela pulled out a chair, leaving one empty between them. "I doubt that. What subject?" "History." He pushed the wrinkled paper toward her. It was an essay assignment about the civil rights movement. Several angry eraser marks had torn holes in the paper. "Ah," Angela said, scanning the assignment. "That's a big topic. Sometimes it helps to break it down into smaller pieces. What interests you most about it?" Jason shrugged, but his eyes held a spark of curiosity. "The protesters, I guess. How they didn't fight back, even when people were awful to them. Seems weird." "It takes more strength to stay peaceful than to lash out," Angela said quietly. "Those protesters were incredibly brave." Something flickered across Jason's face. Recognition, perhaps, or shame. He stared at his paper for a long moment. "How do you do it?" he asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do what?" "Stay nice, even when people..." He trailed off, glancing around the room at the other students who still watched him warily. Angela considered her answer carefully. "Because everyone deserves a chance to be heard, to be understood. Even people who might not always be nice themselves." Jason's pencil tapped rapidly against his paper. "My dad says lots of stuff about people like you." His cheeks reddened. "He says, you don't belong here." "And what do you think?" Angela asked gently. He shrugged again, but the tapping stopped. "You help Sarah with math. She's always crying about math, but she smiled today." He paused. "No one else really listens. They just yell or ignore you." Together, they worked on organizing his thoughts for the essay. Angela noticed his shoulders gradually relaxing, his answers becoming more thoughtful. The other students slowly returned to their own work, as it became clear Jason wasn't there to cause trouble. As the afternoon light faded and parents began arriving, the kids packed up their books. Jason lingered, stuffing his papers slowly into his backpack. The other students filed out, calling goodbye to Angela. Just before he reached the door, Jason turned back. His voice was so quiet, Angela almost missed his words. "My dad says you don't belong here, but you listen better than he does." Then he was gone, leaving Angela alone in the library with his words echoing in her mind. She sat for a moment, surrounded by empty chairs and the lingering warmth of breakthrough. Perhaps her badge wasn't her strongest tool after all. Sometimes, the simple act of listening, of showing compassion when it was least expected, could open doors that force never could. She gathered her own belongings, thinking of Jason's essay about peaceful protesters and the power of responding to hatred with understanding. It seemed some lessons from history were still teaching them all. Angela's heart felt lighter as she walked through the quiet hallways. For the first time since revealing her badge, she felt like she might be making real progress, not through authority or intimidation, but through the simple power of compassion. The kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of simmering enchiladas as Angela stirred the sauce her abuela had taught her to make years ago. She glanced at Mateo, who sat at their small kitchen table working on his history homework. His dark eyebrows were scrunched together in concentration, reminding her so much of his father that her heart squeezed. "Almost done with that chapter?" she asked, sprinkling cheese over the enchiladas. Mateo looked up, his pencil tapping against his textbook. "Yeah, Mr. Peterson said my last essay was really good." He paused, fidgeting with the corner of his paper. "He actually reads it out loud to the class now." Angela set down the cheese and turned to face him fully. "That's wonderful, mijo! Why didn't you tell me sooner?" A small shrug lifted his shoulders. "I didn't want to make a big deal about it." He hesitated, then added in a quieter voice, "It's different now that you're there more often. At school, I mean." Angela's hand stilled on the oven mitts she'd been reaching for. "Different how?" "Just better." Mateo's eyes stayed fixed on his textbook, but his voice grew stronger. "Jason doesn't push me in the hallway anymore. And yesterday, he even asked if he could borrow a pencil. A normal pencil, Mom. Not to snap it or anything." The timer beeped, and Angela pulled the enchiladas from the oven, letting the familiar motion steady her racing heart. She'd seen the changes in Jason during the after-school sessions, the way his tough guy act slipped when she helped him understand a difficult reading passage, how his shoulders relaxed a little more each day. "That's good to hear, baby." She kept her voice casual as she served their plates, not wanting to make too much of this fragile progress. "How about the other kids?" Mateo took a bite of his enchilada, considering. "Sarah from math class actually sits with me at lunch now. And her friends, too." He swallowed, then looked up at her with eyes that held a cautious hope. I think maybe they just needed to see that we're normal people, you know?" Angela's throat tightened. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We've always been normal people, Mateo. Sometimes others just take a while to see it." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The only sounds the soft clink of forks against plates and the distant hum of traffic outside their apartment window. Angela watched her son, noting how he sat a little straighter now, how the worried crease between his eyebrows had softened. "Mom?" Mateo broke the silence, pushing his empty plate away. "I know it's been hard for you too, with work and everything." He twisted his napkin in his hands. "But I'm glad you're at school more. It feels safer." Angela's heart swelled with equal parts joy and ache. Her son shouldn't have to feel grateful for basic safety, but his words confirmed she'd made the right choice in staying involved despite the backlash. "Come here, mi amor." She opened her arms, and Mateo came around the table to hug her. Though he was getting too tall for it, he still tucked his head against her shoulder like he had as a little boy. "We take care of each other, right?" "Right," he mumbled into her shirt. After dinner, while Mateo worked on his reading assignment in the living room, Angela settled at her laptop to check her emails. Most were routine work correspondence, case updates, meeting schedules, the usual bureaucratic threads that kept the FBI running. But one subject line made her pause. From Principal Roberts. Subject: Proposed multicultural event. School board discussion. Her cursor hovered over the message for a moment before she clicked. The screen filled with carefully worded paragraphs about fostering understanding and celebrating diversity. The school board wanted to meet with her to discuss the possibility of organizing a multicultural event. Angela felt a small smile tug at her lips. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it was an opening, a crack in the wall of resistance she'd been pushing against. She looked over at Mateo, completely absorbed in his book now, looking peaceful in the warm lamplight. It wasn't just about safety anymore. It was about belonging, about creating a space where her son, where all the children, could truly be themselves. Her cursor moved to the reply button, and the small smile grew stronger. This was an opportunity she wouldn't waste. The gymnasium hummed with life, as families streamed through the double doors, carrying steaming dishes and colorful decorations. Paper lanterns and flags from dozens of countries hung from the ceiling, creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere. The smell of spices, herbs, and home cooking filled the air. Angela stood near the entrance, greeting people with a warm smile. She wore a vibrant red blouse, embroidered with traditional Mexican patterns that her mother had given her years ago. Her heart swelled as she watched Mateo arranging dishes at their table with careful precision. "Mom!" Mateo called out, waving her over. "Miss Chen showed me how to fold these napkins into flowers. Look!" He held up an intricately folded red napkin, beaming with pride. "That's beautiful, Mijo," Angela said, running her hand through his hair. Their table displayed her grandmother's recipes: enchiladas verdes, fresh tamales, and warm tortillas. The sight and smell transported her back to Sunday afternoons in her childhood kitchen. Across the gym, other families set up their own stations. Mrs. Patel arranged samosas and curry while her daughter strung marigold garlands. The Kim family displayed plates of kimchi and bulgogi. Even Jason's mother had shown up, somewhat hesitantly placing her apple pie and cornbread on a table. The principal's voice came over the speakers. "Welcome everyone to our first annual Cultural Heritage Celebration. Please visit the different stations, try the food, and learn about your neighbors' traditions." People began mingling, filling plates with diverse dishes and sharing stories. Angela watched as Mateo explained to his classmates how his great-grandmother had taught him to make tortillas by hand. His eyes sparkled as he demonstrated the proper technique for rolling the dough. "Agent Ramirez?" A small voice caught her attention. It was Jason, holding a plate of enchiladas. "These are really good. My dad, he actually came too." "He's over there." Jason pointed to a tall man in a plaid shirt, awkwardly sampling some curry. "I'm glad you both came," Angela said softly. "Would you like to learn how to make these?" Jason nodded eagerly, and soon Angela was showing him how to properly roll corn tortillas. His father watched from a distance, his stern expression gradually softening. The gymnasium grew louder with laughter and conversation. Children darted between tables, trying foods they'd never seen before. Parents, who had once avoided eye contact, now chatted easily, exchanging recipes and stories. Mrs. Chen demonstrated traditional Chinese calligraphy, while Mr. Patel taught a group of fascinated kids how to wrap a turban. The walls displayed student artwork celebrating their various heritages, including Mateo's detailed drawing of his grandmother's kitchen in Mexico. Angela felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Mrs. Thompson, the teacher who had dismissed her concerns weeks ago. Her face was tense, but determined as she walked toward the microphone at the center of the room. The principal noticed and quickly quieted the crowd. "Everyone, Mrs. Thompson would like to say a few words." The room fell silent. Mateo moved closer to Angela, gripping her hand tightly. Mrs. Thompson cleared her throat, her hands trembling slightly as she held the microphone. I owe someone an apology," she began, her voice wavering. "When Angela Ramirez came to me about her son being bullied, I didn't just ignore her concerns. I was dismissive and rude. I told her to mind her own business." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I was wrong." Angela felt Mateo's grip tighten as Mrs. Thompson continued. "Looking around this room tonight, seeing all these families sharing their traditions, their food, their stories, I realized that this is exactly what makes our community special. And when I dismissed Mrs. Ramirez's concerns, I wasn't just failing as a teacher, I was failing as a member of this community." Tears glistened in Mrs. Thompson's eyes. "Mrs. Ramirez, I am deeply sorry. Not just for how I treated you, but for not protecting your son when he needed me. Thank you for showing us all what real leadership and compassion look like." Spontaneous applause filled the gymnasium. Angela looked down at Mateo, whose face shone with pride and joy. Around them, families clapped and nodded, some wiping away tears of their own. The applause grew louder, echoing off the gymnasium walls. Angela saw Jason and his father clapping too, genuine smiles on their faces. Mrs. Thompson stepped down from the microphone, and the room buzzed with renewed energy and warmth. Morning sunlight painted the sidewalk in warm golden hues as Angela and Mateo walked to school together. The air felt different today, lighter somehow. Birds chirped cheerfully in the maple trees that lined their path, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Mateo walked with his head held higher than usual, his backpack no longer seeming to weigh him down like it had in previous weeks. Angela noticed the change in his posture, how his shoulders stayed back instead of hunching forward defensively. "Good morning, Mateo," called Sarah, a girl from his class, as she skipped past them with her mother. Her genuine smile made Mateo's face light up. "Hi, Sarah," he he called back, his voice carrying a confidence that made Angela's heart swell. More students approached, and instead of the usual averted gazes or whispered comments, they greeted both mother and son warmly. 2 boys from Mateo's math class waved enthusiastically. "Hey, Mateo, are you coming to soccer practice after school?" one of them asked. "Yeah, I'll be there," Mateo replied, breaking into a grin. As they neared the school entrance, Angela spotted Mrs. Thompson, one of the parents who had been most vocal against her at the PTA meeting. But today, instead of the usual glare, Mrs. Thompson offered a small but genuine nod of acknowledgement. "Agent Ramirez," she said softly as they passed. "The cultural fair was enlightening. Thank you for organizing it." Angela returned the nod, touched by the simple gesture. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Thompson. Your apple pie was delicious." Near the school steps, Jason, the former bully, stood with his father. The man who had once been one of Angela's harshest critics now touched his son's shoulder and guided him toward them. "Agent Ramirez," Jason's father began, clearing his throat awkwardly. "I wanted to say, well, Jason told me about the help you've been giving him with his reading after school. I appreciate that." Angela smiled warmly. "Jason's making great progress. He has a real talent for storytelling." The boy beamed at the praise, a far cry from the angry child who had once targeted Mateo. Inside the school, the walls still displayed artwork and photos from the cultural fair. Children gathered around the bulletin boards, pointing at pictures and chatting excitedly about their favorite moments. The custodian was carefully hanging a new banner in the main hallway that read, "Unity in Diversity." Principal Martinez approached them, his face reflecting genuine warmth. "Good morning, Angela, Mateo. The school board called this morning. They want to implement our cultural awareness program district-wide." "That's wonderful news," Angela replied, her voice thick with emotion. As they reached Mateo's classroom, several students called out to him, "Mateo, we saved you a seat!" Angela watched as her son joined his classmates, fitting naturally into their circle, no longer the outsider. Miss Chen, the teacher who had once dismissed Angela's concerns, now smiled at Mateo and gestured welcomingly to his seat. "Have a great day, Mijo," Angela called. "You too, Mom," Mateo responded, already engaged in animated conversation with his friends. The day passed quickly at the FBI field office, where even her colleagues noticed her lighter mood. Her supervisor stopped by her desk with approval in his eyes. "The community complaints have all been withdrawn," he informed her. "And that civil rights case you've been working on? The witnesses are finally willing to talk. Seems like you've earned their trust." Evening found Angela and Mateo at home, sharing stories about their day over homemade enchiladas. Mateo couldn't stop talking about soccer practice and his plans for the weekend with his new friends. After dinner, Angela knelt beside her bed, clasping her hands in prayer. Tears of gratitude rolled down her cheeks as she thanked God for transforming their pain into something beautiful. The journey had been difficult, but watching hatred dissolve into understanding made every moment worth it. She thought about the community that had initially rejected them but now embraced their differences. She thanked God for giving her the strength to respond to anger with kindness, to fear with courage, and to hatred with love. Rising from her prayers, Angela went to Mateo's room. He was already in bed, reading a book Jason had recommended. She sat on the edge of his bed and smoothed his dark hair. "I'm proud of you, Mijo," she whispered. "You never lost faith." "I'm proud of you too, Mom," he replied, putting down his book. "You showed everyone how to be brave." Angela leaned down and kissed his forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. Her heart felt full to bursting with love and gratitude. For the first time since the troubles began, she truly believed the worst was behind them. "Good night, my brave boy," she murmured. "Good night, Mom," Mateo responded, his voice peaceful and content. As she turned out his light, Angela paused in the doorway, watching her son settle into sleep. The moonlight streaming through his window cast a gentle glow over his relaxed face, and she said a final silent prayer of thanks. Their community had transformed, and with it their lives had changed for the better. The clock on Angela's kitchen wall ticked past 3:45 p.m. Her eyes darted between her phone and the window overlooking their quiet suburban street. Mateo always texted when he was running late, and he should have been home 15 minutes ago. She drummed her fingers on the counter, trying to push down the rising anxiety in her chest. Maybe he'd stayed behind for art club? No, that was Tuesdays. This was Thursday. At 4:00 p.m., she called his cell phone. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. "Mateo, honey, call me as soon as you get this message. I'm worried." Her FBI training kicked in, fighting against her maternal panic. She called the school first. The secretary's voice was hesitant. "Mrs. Ramirez, Mateo left at the regular time. Is everything okay?" Angela grabbed her car keys, her hand shaking. "I'll find out. Please call me if he shows up there." She drove the route Mateo took home from school, scanning every corner and alley. The local park was empty except for a few younger kids with their parents. The library, usually his favorite hiding spot, hadn't seen him. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she dialed his phone again. This time, a different voice answered. Unfamiliar. Female. Professional. "Hello. Is this Angela Ramirez?" The world tilted sideways. "Yes. Who is this?" "I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. We have your son Mateo here in the emergency department." Angela barely heard the rest. Her training took over as she flipped on her hazard lights and made a sharp U-turn. The 10-minute drive to the hospital felt like hours. She burst through the ER doors, badge already in hand. "I'm FBI agent Angela Ramirez. My son Mateo was brought in." The nurse at the desk pointed her to Bay 4. Angela's legs felt like lead as she pushed aside the curtain. Her breath caught in her throat. Mateo lay on the hospital bed, his face swollen and bruised. His left arm was wrapped in temporary bandages, and an ice pack rested on his ribs. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open when she gasped. "Mom?" His voice was barely a whisper. Angela rushed to his side, carefully taking his uninjured hand. "I'm here, mi amor. I'm here." She fought to keep her voice steady, to be strong for him, but tears spilled down her cheeks. The doctor appeared behind her, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Ramirez, your son has a broken wrist, 2 bruised ribs, and multiple contusions. We're waiting on some x-rays to rule out a concussion." "What happened?" Angela's voice cracked. Mateo's lip trembled. "They were waiting. By the construction site on Oak Street. Jason's older brother and his friends." He winced as he tried to shift position. Angela's blood ran cold. The construction site was a blind spot. No security cameras, no witnesses. They'd chosen their location carefully. This wasn't random. This was calculated. A police officer entered the bay, notepad ready. "Agent Ramirez? We found your son's backpack scattered near the attack site. His phone was smashed, but we recovered it. The perpetrators took nothing. This wasn't a robbery." Angela nodded numbly. Of course it wasn't. This was retaliation, plain and simple. All her work, all the progress they'd made. It meant nothing to those determined to hate. She watched as nurses came to check Mateo's vitals, adjust his IV, bring him pain medication. Each wince, each quiet whimper felt like a knife in her heart. She'd been so focused on changing minds, on building bridges, that she'd forgotten some people didn't want bridges built. The evening stretched on. X-rays confirmed no concussion, but they wanted to keep him overnight for observation. Angela pulled a chair close to his bed, refusing to leave even when visiting hours ended. Her badge had some advantages. As night fell, Mateo drifted in and out of sleep, the pain medication making him groggy. During one quiet moment, his eyes opened, glassy with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom." "Sorry? Mihijo. You have nothing to be sorry for." She squeezed his hand gently. "I should have been stronger, should have fought back." His voice was thick with shame. Angela's heart shattered. Here was her beautiful boy, beaten and broken, apologizing to her. All her authority, her badge, her attempts at community outreach, none of it had protected him when it mattered most. She stroked his hair, careful to avoid the bruises on his face. "You're the strongest person I know, Mateo. You survive with kindness in a world that can be so cruel. That's real strength." But as he drifted back to sleep, Angela felt her own strength crumbling. She'd failed in her most important job, keeping her son safe. All the progress at school, the multicultural fair, the tentative acceptance they'd gained, it felt hollow now. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and Mateo's soft breathing. Angela held his hand, watching his chest rise and fall. In sleep, the pain lines eased from his face, making him look younger, more vulnerable. She thought of all the times she'd assured him things would get better, that standing up for what was right would make a difference. Now, looking at his injuries, those promises felt like lies. Tears fell freely as she leaned close to his bed. Her voice was barely a whisper, broken with guilt and grief. "I should have protected you better." Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital room's thin curtains, casting pale shadows across Mateo's sleeping face. Angela hadn't left his side all night, her FBI badge clutched in her trembling hands. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her usually neat blazer was wrinkled from spending the night in the uncomfortable hospital chair. The steady beep of the heart monitor provided a rhythm to her scattered thoughts. Mateo's face was bruised, his left arm in a cast. The doctors had said he was lucky it could have been much worse. But those words brought little comfort as she watched her son's chest rise and fall with each breath. Her phone vibrated against the metal side table, making her jump. The caller ID displayed, "FBI Supervisor." Angela's stomach clenched. She glanced at Mateo, still sleeping, before stepping into the hallway. "Agent Ramirez," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Angela." Supervisor Reed's tone was grave. "I've just finished an emergency meeting with the bureau chiefs. Given recent events and the publicity surrounding your situation, we're suspending your assignment indefinitely." The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright. Angela leaned against the wall for support. "Sir, please, I can explain." "This isn't a request for explanation, Angela. The decision's been made. Your presence has become problematic for the investigation. We can't have an agent whose personal involvement might compromise our work." "My son was attacked," Angela whispered fiercely. "How can you expect me not to be involved?" "That's precisely the point." Reed sighed. "Look, Angela, you're a good agent, one of our best. But this situation has spiraled beyond your control. Take some personal leave. Focus on your son. We'll reevaluate in a few weeks." The call ended, leaving Angela standing alone in the sterile hospital hallway. The badge in her hand, the symbol of everything she'd worked for, suddenly felt heavy, almost foreign. Back in Mateo's room, she sank into the chair, letting the badge fall into her lap. Years of training, countless solved cases, breaking through the glass ceiling as a Latina woman in the FBI, all of it seemed to be crumbling around her. A nurse came in to check Mateo's vitals, offering Angela a sympathetic smile. "Can I get you anything, dear? Coffee, maybe?" Angela shook her head, managing a weak, "Thank you." As the nurse left, she noticed a stack of cards on the windowsill. Well wishes from some of Mateo's classmates. Even Jason, the former bully, had sent one. The sight of them only made her chest ache more. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through messages from concerned colleagues and friends. One caught her eye, a local news article about the attack. The comments section was filled with opinions about her role in the community, some supportive, others cruel. She quickly closed the app. "Mom?" Mateo's voice was barely above a whisper. Angela was instantly at his side, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "I'm here, my Joe. How are you feeling?" "Tired." His eyes focused on her face, then narrowed with concern. "You look sad." Leave it to her perceptive son to see right through her. Angela tried to smile, but tears welled up instead. "I'm just worried about you, that's all." "Is it about work?" Mateo asked. "I heard you in the hallway." Angela's heart sank. She'd hoped he'd been asleep for that conversation. "Yes, sweetheart, there are some complications." "Because of me?" His voice cracked. "Because I couldn't defend myself?" "No, no, mi amor." Angela took his uninjured hand in both of hers. "None of this is your fault. The people who did this to you, they're the ones to blame. Not you, never you." Mateo was quiet for a moment, his fingers tightening around hers. But you might lose your job because of what happened. Angela couldn't lie to him. I might, but that doesn't matter right now. What matters is you getting better. It does matter, Matteo insisted, his voice stronger. You love your job. You help people. He tried to sit up, wincing slightly. Remember what you told me when Dad died? That we had to be strong, even when it hurt? Angela nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Don't give up, Mom, Matteo whispered, his eyes bright with unshed tears. You always say we don't give up. The words hit Angela like a physical force. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked at her son, her brave, wonderful boy who, even lying in a hospital bed, was trying to give her strength. She pressed his hand to her wet cheek, overwhelmed by the truth in his simple words. All the times she'd told him to be strong, to stand up for what was right, to never let fear win. Those weren't just empty phrases. They were the core of who they were as a family. You're right, my Joe, she managed to say through her tears. You're absolutely right. The small hospital chapel sat quiet and empty when Angela first walked in. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns on the wooden pews. She stood at the entrance, smoothing her wrinkled blazer and taking a deep breath. Her son's words echoed in her mind. Don't give up, Mom. She had spent the morning making calls, reaching out to parents, teachers, and community members. Some hung up, others listened. Now, she waited to see who would actually show up. The first to arrive was Mrs. Chen, whose daughter had been in Matteo's art class. She gave Angela a small nod and took a seat near the front. Then came Mr. Rodriguez, the grocery store owner who had always greeted them warmly. One by one, people trickled in, faces she recognized from PTA meetings, some friendly, others wary. Even Jason's mother slipped in quietly, choosing a spot near the back. Angela's heart skipped. She hadn't expected her to come. When the small chapel was about half full, Angela walked to the front. Her legs felt shaky, but her voice remained steady. Thank you all for coming, she began, her words echoing slightly in the quiet space. I know many of you are wondering why I called this meeting here, of all places. She gestured to the chapel around them. This is a place of healing, and right now our community needs healing more than ever. Angela pulled out a worn photo from her pocket, herself as a rookie FBI agent, standing proud in her uniform. When I first got my badge, I thought it would protect me. Protect my son. Her voice caught slightly. But a badge can't stop hatred. It can't stop fear. She shared stories she'd never told before. About the whispered comments when she'd first moved to town. About Matteo coming home in tears, trying to scrub his skin lighter. About watching other children suffer in silence, too afraid to speak up. I'm not just an FBI agent, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I'm a mother, a neighbor, a person who believes in this community. She looked around the room, meeting eyes that now watched her intently. When I showed my badge that day at school, I wasn't trying to intimidate. I was desperate to protect my child, like any of you would do. Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Rodriguez nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Right now, my son lies in a hospital bed upstairs because some people still choose hate over understanding. Angela's voice cracked, but she pressed on. But Matteo told me something this morning. He said, don't give up. And he's right. We can't give up on our children. We can't give up on each other. She noticed Jason's mother shift in her seat, clutching her purse tightly. I'm not asking for special treatment, Angela continued. I'm asking for us to work together, to show our children that kindness is stronger than fear. That this community can be better than hate notes shoved under doors or violence in parking lots. The chapel fell silent. Angela could hear the distant beeping of hospital monitors, reminding her of Matteo's brave smile, despite his bruises. Some of you have questioned whether I belong here, she said softly. But this is my home. These are our children. And they're watching us, learning from how we treat each other. Tears rolled down her cheeks now, but she didn't wipe them away. I'm standing here not as an FBI agent, but as a mother, asking for help. Help me make this community a place where every child feels safe, where every parent can sleep at night without worrying their child will be next. To her surprise, Jason's mother stood up. Her voice trembled. "My son, he told me how you helped him with math after school. How you never treated him differently, even after." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ramirez, we've been wrong." One by one, others stood. Mrs. Chen spoke about her own experiences with discrimination. Mr. Rodriguez shared how his grandchildren faced similar battles. Parents who had once turned away now stepped forward, offering support and ideas for change. The principal, who had slipped in during Angela's speech, stood up. "Mrs. Ramirez is right. We've failed our children, but together we can fix this." An elderly woman Angela recognized from her neighborhood rose slowly. "Count me in. These kids need to see us united." More voices joined in. Parents suggested forming a community watch group. Teachers proposed new anti-bullying programs. Even those who had been skeptical began nodding, contributing ideas. In the warm light of the chapel, surrounded by neighbors who were finally becoming allies, Angela felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Real, tangible hope, not just for Mateo, but for all the children in their community. Jason's mother made her way to the front, tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Ramirez, Angela, I'd like to help organize these changes, if you'll let me." Angela reached out and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you all." The meeting continued, with people breaking into smaller groups, exchanging phone numbers, and making plans. The atmosphere in the chapel had transformed from tense uncertainty to purposeful determination. These weren't just empty promises. These were parents and neighbors truly committed to change. Angela stood back, watching as her community began to heal, one conversation at a time. They still had a long way to go, but something profound had shifted in that chapel. The tide wasn't just turning. It had changed direction entirely. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Middle School's main entrance as Angela approached the building. Her FBI badge stayed tucked away in her purse. Today she walked in as a mother, flanked by 24 parents and community members who had answered her call at the hospital chapel. Her heart thumped against her ribs as she pushed open the heavy doors. The click of her sensible shoes echoed through the empty hallway as they made their way to the school auditorium where an emergency meeting had been called. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she drew strength from the supportive presence behind her. The auditorium was already half full when they entered. Principal Davidson stood at the podium, shuffling papers nervously. The school board members sat in a row of chairs on the stage, their faces carefully neutral. Angela noticed several empty seats where certain parents usually sat, including Jason Miller's father. "Mrs. Ramirez," Principal Davidson began, his voice wavering slightly, "we understand you have some concerns to address." Angela straightened her shoulders and walked to the center of the room. "Not just concerns," she said clearly. "We're here with demands for change." She gestured to the group behind her. "These parents and community members stand with me." Mrs. Chen, whose daughter had also faced bullying, stepped forward. "My Emily came home crying 3 times last month. The current policies aren't working." "We can't control everything that happens outside school grounds," one board member protested, referring to Mateo's attack. "But we can create a culture of zero tolerance for hatred inside these walls," Angela countered. She pulled out a folder containing documented incidents of bullying that had been ignored or downplayed. 27 reported incidents in the past semester alone. Only 3 resulted in any disciplinary action. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. More parents began standing up, sharing their own children's experiences. The volume in the room grew as more voices joined in support. "We want mandatory diversity training for all staff," Angela projected over the noise. "Regular anti-bullying workshops for students. A clear reporting system with actual consequences. The budget," another board member started, "will be a lot smaller than defending a civil rights lawsuit," Angela cut in, though her tone remained measured. "This isn't a threat, it's a reality check." The crowd behind her had swelled, as more parents and students filtered in, drawn by the commotion. Some teachers stood along the walls, watching intently. Angela recognized Mrs. Torres, who had apologized at the multicultural event, nodding in agreement. My son lies in a hospital bed because this school failed to protect him, Angela continued, her voice thick with emotion but steady. How many more children need to get hurt before we take real action? A movement near the door caught her attention. Jason Miller slipped into the auditorium, alone. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by uncharacteristic uncertainty. He looked smaller somehow, without his usual group of followers. Principal Davidson tried to regain control of the meeting. Perhaps we should table this discussion until— No more waiting, several voices called out at once. The demands grew louder, more insistent. Parents who had once whispered behind Angela's back now stood beside her, united in purpose. Then, something unexpected happened. Jason Miller began making his way through the crowd. People parted automatically, creating a path to the center where Angela stood. His face was pale but determined. I want to say something," he said, his voice cracking slightly. The room fell absolutely silent. Angela felt her breath catch, but she gave him an encouraging nod. Jason swallowed hard, then turned to face the crowd. "I'm one of the bullies," he admitted. His words rang out in the hushed auditorium. "I was mean to Mateo." To others too. His hands trembled, but he kept going. "I said things, did things, because I thought it made me look tough. Because," he glanced at the empty seat where his father usually sat, "because I heard those things at home." You could have heard a pin drop in the silence that followed. But Mrs. Ramirez. Jason's eyes filled with tears. "She never treated me like I was bad, even when I was awful to her son. She helped me with homework and actually listened when I talked. And his voice broke, "I'm sorry, we need to change. The school needs to change. Please." The raw honesty in Jason's voice held everyone spellbound. Angela saw tears in the eyes of several board members. Mrs. Torres had her hand pressed to her mouth. Parents who had been on the fence about supporting stronger measures now looked thoroughly shaken. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The weight of Jason's confession hung in the air, transforming the atmosphere from one of angry demands to something more profound, the possibility of real change. The autumn morning sparkled with possibility as Angela adjusted Mateo's jacket collar. Though still healing, he insisted on walking beside her for the march. His bruises had faded to yellowish patches, but his eyes shone with determination. "You sure you're up for this, my Joe?" Angela smoothed his hair, noting how he'd styled it carefully this morning, despite his sore shoulder. "I'm sure, Mom." Mateo squared his shoulders. "Someone has to take the first step, right?" Angela's heart swelled with pride. The last few weeks had changed them both, but somehow her son had emerged stronger, wiser beyond his years. She watched as he joined his classmates who were gathering at the town square, their small hands gripping colorful banners. Mrs. Chen, one of the parents who'd stood with Angela at the hospital chapel, approached with an armful of signs. "Channel 7 News just arrived," she said, gesturing toward a van parking nearby. "And look who else showed up." Angela turned to see Jason, the former bully, hovering uncertainly at the edge of the crowd. His father was notably absent, but his mother stood behind him, her hand protective on his shoulder. After a moment's hesitation, Mateo walked over and handed Jason a spare banner. The two boys shared a quiet look of understanding. "Ready?" Angela called out, her voice carrying across the square. Nearly 100 people had gathered, students, parents, teachers, and even some curious onlookers. The banners rose high. "Choose kindness. Unity makes us stronger. No room for hate." A reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Mrs. Ramirez, could you tell us what inspired this march?" Angela glanced at Mateo before answering. "This march was inspired by every child who's ever felt different, scared, or alone. But more importantly, it's about showing them they're not alone anymore." The crowd began moving, following Angela and Mateo down Main Street. Shop owners stepped out to watch. Some joined in. Angela noticed Mr. Peterson, the gruff hardware store owner who'd once complained about troublemakers, now standing respectfully with his hat in his hands. The children's voices rose in a chant they'd practiced. Kind words, kind hearts, that's how change starts. Their small feet carried them past the library, where elderly Mrs. Wilson wiped tears from her eyes and waved. Past the ice cream parlor, where Tony, the owner, rushed out with free popsicles for the marchers. Local police officers, led by Officer Martinez, helped direct traffic around the procession. Angela caught the officer's eye and received a knowing nod. They'd both seen too many cases where silence and fear had won. Not today. The news cameras followed as the march wound through town, capturing the moment when Jason stepped forward to speak into the microphone. "I was wrong," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "I hurt people because I was hurting. But Mrs. Ramirez showed me that being kind isn't weak. It's the strongest thing you can be." Mateo walked beside his former bully, their banners held high together. The sight brought fresh tears to Angela's eyes. She remembered the hospital room, the fear, the anger, but here was proof that hearts could change. Principal Davidson met them at the school steps, where the march would end. His usual stiff demeanor had softened. "Mrs. Ramirez," he said, loud enough for the cameras to hear, "the school board has unanimously approved the new anti-bullying measures. And," he paused, looking genuinely moved, "we're establishing a cultural awareness program. We want all our students to feel safe and valued." The crowd erupted in cheers. Angela watched as parents hugged their children, as former adversaries shook hands, as her small community began to heal. Later that evening, as the sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, Angela led a tired but happy Mateo up their front steps. Their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had left a pot of her famous chicken soup on the porch with a note, "For my brave neighbors." Inside, Angela helped Mateo get ready for bed, noting how carefully he still moved. But there was a new lightness in his movements, a certainty that hadn't been there before. "Mom?" Mateo said as she tucked the blanket around him. "Remember when you said sometimes the bravest thing is to keep believing in people?" "I remember, Mio. You were right." He touched one of his fading bruises thoughtfully. "It hurt a lot, but look what happened. Everything's different now." Angela sat on the edge of his bed, drinking in the sight of her son's smile, stronger and more resilient than any bruise. She leaned down to kiss his forehead, thankful for this moment, for this victory, for the pure and simple wisdom of a child's heart. "Get some rest, brave one," she whispered. But Mateo was already drifting off, his face peaceful, the last rays of sunset painting his room in warm, hopeful colors. Angela's heels clicked against the polished floor of the FBI field office as she made her way to her supervisor's office. Her heart beat a little faster with each step. The familiar walls, lined with photos of graduating academy classes and distinguished agents, seemed to watch her progress. She paused at Special Agent Reed's door, taking a deep breath. The morning sunlight filtered through his office blinds, casting thin strips of light across the carpet. Her hand trembled slightly as she knocked. "Come in, Agent Ramirez." Reed sat behind his desk, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed, his expression unreadable as always. Several manila folders lay spread before him. Angela recognized one as her case file. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Angela smoothed her dark blazer and sat down, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. "I've been reviewing your situation," Reed began, his voice measured. "The complaints from parents, the school incident, the subsequent events with your son." He paused, shuffling through some papers. "And the remarkable transformation that followed." Angela's throat felt tight. "Sir, I know my actions may have seemed—" Reed held up a hand. "Let me finish, Agent Ramirez." He leaned forward, removing his reading glasses. "When I suspended your assignment, I thought you'd compromised our investigation into civil rights violations in the community. I was wrong." The words hung in the air. Angela barely dared to breathe. "What you did," Reed continued, "was expose exactly the kind of systemic problems we've been trying to document. But more than that, you showed us a better way to address them." He stood up and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "The Bureau can file charges, make arrests, force compliance. But real change? That comes from within communities themselves. He turned to face her. You've achieved something remarkable, Agent Ramirez. You've turned a town's prejudice into progress. Angela felt tears threatening to form but blinked them back. I was just trying to protect my son, sir. And in doing so, you protected many others. Reed returned to his desk and pulled out a fresh document. The school board's new anti-bullying measures are being studied by neighboring districts. The multicultural program you started is gaining attention from the state education department. He smiled slightly. Even that student mentoring initiative you began has shown impressive results. Angela thought of Jason, the former bully who'd found his voice speaking up for change. Her heart swelled with pride. Sir, she said carefully, what about my assignment? Reed picked up a pen. Not only am I reinstating you, Agent Ramirez, but I'm expanding your role. We want you to help develop community outreach programs based on what you've accomplished here. Your experience could help other agents navigate similar situations. Angela's hands trembled in her lap. I don't know what to say. The Bureau needs agents who understand that law enforcement isn't just about enforcing laws. It's about building trust, fostering understanding, and yes, sometimes showing compassion. Reed signed the document with a flourish. You've demonstrated that perfectly. He handed her the paper, her reinstatement orders. Angela took it, her vision blurring slightly. There's something else, Reed said, his tone softening. How's Mateo doing? Better every day, Angela replied, thinking of her son's growing confidence. The doctors say his physical injuries are almost healed, and, she smiled, his spirit was never broken. Like mother, like son, Reed observed. He stood, extending his hand. Congratulations, Agent Ramirez. You've made us proud. Angela shook his hand, feeling the weight of the past months lift from her shoulders. As she turned to leave, Reed called after her. And Angela? She paused at the door. Thank you for showing us that sometimes the strongest weapon we have is a mother's love. Walking through the office corridor, Angela clutched the reinstatement papers to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, We did it, Mateo. The school gymnasium buzzed with anticipation as students, teachers, and parents filed in for the special assembly. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting warm patches across the polished floor. Angela sat in the front row, her FBI badge tucked away in her purse. Today she was just a proud mother. Principal Martinez stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone twice. The gentle murmur of voices faded to silence. Behind him, a large banner hung from the ceiling, still covered by a blue cloth. Today marks a new chapter for our school, the principal began, his voice carrying clear and strong. We've learned valuable lessons about unity, acceptance, and the power of standing together. Angela's eyes drifted to where Mateo sat with his classmates. He wore his favorite blue sweater, the one she'd bought him for his birthday, and though he fidgeted with the paper in his hands, his shoulders were straight, proud. No longer the scared boy who'd come home crying just months ago. It's my honor to unveil our new school motto, Principal Martinez continued. He nodded to two students who pulled the cords, letting the blue cloth fall away. The banner unfurled, revealing bold letters that read, Kindness is our strength. A wave of applause filled the gymnasium. Angela noticed Jason, once Mateo's bully, now sitting quietly with his parents, clapping along with everyone else. His father, who had once demanded Angela's badge be revoked, gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. And now, the principal smiled, we have a special presentation. Mateo Ramirez will share a poem he wrote about courage. Angela's heart swelled as Mateo stood up. He walked to the podium with measured steps, no longer trying to make himself invisible. The microphone squeaked as he adjusted it, and a few people chuckled warmly. Mateo smiled. Actually smiled. At the sound. My poem is called The Strength Inside, he began, his voice soft but clear. Angela felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes as she listened to her son's words. Sometimes courage wears a badge, sometimes it's quiet and small. Sometimes it's standing up for others, or learning how not to fall. My mother taught me bravery isn't about being tough and mean, it's about choosing what is right, Even when you're scared and lean, kindness takes more courage than pushing others down. It means reaching out your hand to help someone who might drown. We all have strength inside us, a light that wants to shine. When we stand together, that's when we're truly fine. The gymnasium remained silent for a moment after Mateo finished, then erupted in thunderous applause. Mrs. Thompson, the teacher who had once dismissed Angela's concerns, wiped tears from her eyes. Several students stood up, clapping harder. Angela watched as Mateo's face broke into a wide grin. He looked directly at her, and in that moment, she saw not just her son, but a young man who had found his voice. The same quiet strength that had always been there now shone for everyone to see. Parents, who had once whispered behind her back, now turned to smile at her. The community that had felt so fractured months ago had come together, not just in words, but in genuine understanding. Even the local newspaper photographer, capturing the moment for tomorrow's edition, seemed moved by the scene. Teachers stood along the walls, wearing pins that displayed the new motto. Angela recognized them as part of the recently implemented anti-bullying program, a program that had already shown promising results in its first few weeks. As Mateo made his way back to his seat, students reached out to pat his shoulder or give him high fives. He walked tall, no longer trying to dodge attention or hurry past others. When Jason offered him a fist bump, Mateo returned it without hesitation. Principal Martinez returned to the podium. "Thank you, Mateo. Your words remind us why this new motto isn't just a phrase. It's a commitment we make to each other every day." The applause swelled again, filling the gymnasium with its thunder. Angela looked around at the sea of faces, brown, black, white, young, old, all united in this moment. Parents, who had once been divided, now sat together, their children playing and laughing side by side. Teachers, who had once turned a blind eye, now stood as active guardians of this new culture of kindness. This wasn't just a school assembly, it was a testament to what could happen when a community chose to grow, to learn, to change. The new motto gleamed above them all. Kindness is our strength. Words that had transformed from a simple phrase into a living reality. Angela smiled as she watched student after student stand, the applause continuing in waves. She saw in their faces the genuine pride of belonging to a school that had found its heart. Change had truly begun, not just in policies or programs, but in the very spirit of the community itself. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow, illuminating the faces of everyone in the gymnasium. Faces that no longer looked at each other with suspicion or fear, but with understanding and acceptance. This was what real change looked like, not forced, not temporary, but growing naturally from seeds of compassion that had been carefully tended and nurtured. The crisp morning air carried the sweet scent of spring as Angela and Mateo walked toward the middle school entrance. Cherry blossoms dotted the pathway, their pink petals dancing in the gentle breeze. Angela squeezed her son's hand, and he returned the gesture with a confident smile. So different from the scared boy who'd once dreaded these morning walks. "Mom, did you finish your speech for the FBI thing?" Mateo asked, adjusting his backpack. "Almost," Angela replied, smoothing down her navy blazer. "I still can't believe they want me to speak at Quantico about community engagement." "You're going to do great," Mateo said with unwavering certainty. "Just tell them what you always tell me, that kindness wins." As they approached the school steps, a group of students called out to Mateo. "Hey, we saved you a spot at lunch today." Jason, once his tormentor, now a friend, waved from the small crowd. Children of various backgrounds stood together, their differences forgotten in the warmth of friendship. "See you after school, Mom." Mateo gave her a quick hug before joining his friends. Angela watched as they surrounded him, chattering about an upcoming science project. Her heart swelled at the sight of her son's easy smile, the way he stood tall among his peers. Mrs. Chen, one of the parent volunteers who had initially opposed Angela, approached with a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this before your big presentation," she said, offering the cup. The PTA wanted me to wish you luck at Quantico next week. Thank you, Angela said, touched by the gesture. I never expected to be speaking at the FBI Academy about what happened here. Well, you showed us all something important, Mrs. Chen replied. Sometimes it takes one person's courage to wake up an entire community. Principal Martinez emerged from the front doors, his face lighting up when he saw Angela. Agent Ramirez, perfect timing. The new student council wants to interview you for the school paper about your upcoming speech at Quantico. Angela laughed softly. They know I'm just a mom who happened to have a badge, right? You're much more than that, the principal said seriously. You're proof that change is possible when someone refuses to give up. As they talked, more parents arrived with their children. Angela noticed how they greeted each other across cultural lines that had once seemed impossible to bridge. Mrs. Patterson, whose son had been part of the group that hurt Mateo, now chatted warmly with Mr. Gonzalez about their son's baseball team. The morning bell chimed, and students began filing inside. Angela watched as a new student, looking lost and nervous, stood hesitating at the entrance. Without prompting, Mateo and his friends approached the girl, introducing themselves and offering to show her around. Your son, Principal Martinez observed. He's become quite the leader. He learned it the hard way, Angela replied softly. But sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most. Her phone buzzed, a message from her FBI supervisor. Speech draft received. Powerful stuff, Ramirez. You'll have every field office wanting to know your community engagement strategies. Angela smiled, remembering how close she'd come to losing her badge. Now her experience would help train other agents in building bridges instead of walls. The irony wasn't lost on her. As the last students hurried inside, Angela's eyes drifted to the large banner hanging above the school entrance. The words, "Kindness is our strength," stood out in bold letters against the blue background. She remembered the day they'd unveiled it, how Mateo had stood proud despite his healing bruises, reading his poem about courage to the whole school. A warm breeze lifted her hair, and Angela closed her eyes, whispering a prayer of gratitude. In trying to protect her son, she'd helped heal an entire town. The journey had been painful, filled with moments of doubt and fear. But standing here now, watching the last few students rush to class, she knew every tear had been worth it. The school secretary poked her head out. Agent Ramirez, the student council is ready for their interview whenever you are. Coming, Angela replied, taking one last look at the banner. Its message was simple but profound, like the truth they'd all discovered together. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in a badge or authority, but in the courage to choose kindness, even when it seems impossible. She touched the FBI badge in her pocket, no longer feeling the weight of it as a burden, but as a reminder of how far they'd come. The hallways that had once echoed with whispered prejudice now rang with laughter and friendship. Mateo's smile, once shadowed by fear, now shone bright and true. Angela paused at the entrance, her hand resting on the door handle. Through the glass, she could see the student council waiting, their young faces eager and open. These were the real changemakers, the next generation who would carry forward the lessons they'd learned about unity and acceptance. The banner above her fluttered in the morning breeze, its message catching the sunlight. Kindness is our strength. Not just words anymore, but a living truth that had transformed their community. Angela whispered her prayer of gratitude, feeling the depth of its meaning in her heart. Their journey had done more than save Mateo. It had shown an entire town the power of choosing love over fear, unity over division, and hope over hatred. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Angela Ramirez, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.